And away we go. So before I get into the news, similar to the last time I recorded a podcast episode, is have a scroll through the group chat on Discord with me and the other lads that usually come on here and discuss stuff and whatnot. So firstly, I found this YouTube video about this political party in Australia called One Nation, how they are dominating in the primary vote. I don't know much about Australian politics, about what the primary vote is and other rounds and such. All I can describe to you in One Nation in the briefest description as possible, it is the Aussie equivalent to Reform UK. And if you don't know what any of those things are, One Nation is a firm, solid right-wing party, nor centre-right either. It is firmly on the right. And support in recent months for One Nation on Australia is making a rise in upcoming local elections. So, I mean, yeah, let's just see how this goes. Now, it's not guaranteed that One Nation is going to be the next government in the state and across the states of Australia, or even in the federal government. However, it is interesting to see that this party, One Nation, by the way, it was formed many years ago. It's not like Reform UK that just formed just a few odd years ago in the 2010s, in the late 2010s, as as a party that's promoting some kind of agenda or proposal. This party existed, not sure whereabouts it was exactly, but it did first existed in the early 2000s, to say the least. And it's been going on for many decades, even though many state level and federal level elections they haven't got they haven't broke through double digits during its entirety of its existence. It's right now, according to polls in Australia, One Nation is making a rise, and it will come to a point, not now, not next year, or the year after that, but in the next few elections, state or federal level, One Nation will either be leading the opposition or will be the next local or federal government. So keep your eyes on for that, because you never know what's going on in Australia and the current Australian government. And whilst there could be people saying, oh, they're doing a pretty good job, there's a lot of people that say, no, he's doing terribly. So yeah, I don't want to jump to conclusions just yet, or right now. Anything is possible, anything can change. It is worth keeping an eye out for whatever happens in Australia, and if whatever momentum is happening right now continues to be projected. Eric Taylor sent me a Twitter X video. It's a leaked video of Erica Kirk 5 days after Charlie Kirk's death. What do you notice? Question mark as the caption. Uh, Eric replied, "Not sad at all that her husband passed." He's right. And look, I don't. And at the time when Charlie Kirk passed away, whilst the lads that I usually do the podcast with, they had something to say. I didn't, and even if I did, I did what I usually do. I'd wait a few weeks, not few days, a few weeks before discussing anything, like I did when Liam Payne passed away in Argentina a year ago. Wow. So yeah, when likewise with Liam Payne when he passed away in Argentina, I'd give it a few weeks minimum. Just wait for the dust to settle before discussing any of that. And even when a few months have passed, about anyone who has lost their life for whatever reason, it is important that whilst we are honest and we are entitled to whatever opinions that we have about anything, it is worth being cautious about the words that we say. And I have said a few episodes ago about when Charlie Kirk have lost his life. I know people who like Charlie Kirk's opinions, nor people don't like what Charlie Kirk has said or done. And that's okay. We're entitled to those opinions. And of course, I have also said how there are people that reacted to Charlie Kirk's passing in a celebratory way, which is, in my opinion, disgusting and messed up. I would say the same thing if anyone celebrated the death of any person, even if it's someone who has left-wing ideologies or opinions. I'd still say, why are you celebrating that someone died? That is messed up. That I will say. So anyway, back to the Twitter X post that Eric sent about Eric Kirk a few days after Charlie Kirk passed away. I watched a few seconds, the first minute or two of that video, and of course Erica Kirk did talk about the passing of her late husband. Yeah, from my perspective, when she started talking about Charlie, the way her face was expressed when she was talking about Charlie Kirk, like a brief seconds after another discussion that she had with someone else, is a different facial expression that Erica Kirk had when she was going out to Turning Point USA tours since Charlie Kirk's passing, and every time she was asked to discuss about her late husband, what he's done for Turning Point, and who Charlie Kirk is as a father of two children, her facial expression when discussing Charlie Kirk is different to the one she showed in that Twitter X video that Eric Taylor posted on our group chat. And whilst the dust has settled, again, I would personally, I am cautious with the words that I choose. It's unfortunate that someone has lost their life, even when there are people that don't like the opinions of said individual, which again, everyone's entitled to. No one should be convinced otherwise, forcibly, for any reason whatsoever. I find concerning that how Charlie's own wife isn't showing, from my perspective, as much grief for Charlie's passing as many of Charlie's supporters have when his life was taken. Again, that's just my opinion. Make of that information as you will. If anyone has anything to say on this situation, or how people react to when Charlie Kirk lost his life, then go ahead. Otherwise, now I'm wondering, not that it's urgent, I'm also curious now. Who's not to say there would be other people close within Charlie Kirk's social circle that, again, may also not show as much grief as many of his supporters who have followed Turning Point USA and have followed his journey into debating publicly on university campuses with students about, well, whatever opinions Charlie Kirk says he disagrees with, and asks for students to convince him otherwise, and Charlie Kirk gives his say about this and that, so on and so forth. It's different gravy, in my opinion. Of course, a lot of people that supported Charlie Kirk were absolutely devastated. Now, the same cannot be said for anyone that disagrees with Charlie Kirk. I know no one would grieve anyone whose opinions they would heavily disagree with, which, again, everyone's entitled to the opinions they have, and don't have to forcibly go into stuff that is expected because they have to. Yeah, one thing I will say, celebrating the death of a person, regardless of opinions, perspective, lifestyle, background, etc., no one should ever cross that line whatsoever. You don't have to like the person, you don't have to mourn with other people, nor you have to agree with the things this person has said or done. However, celebrating is a massive no-go. That is off on every level. So yeah, that is it. And again, it is unfortunate that I am learning that, well, maybe not just his wife, but there could, not saying it's true, but there could be other people within Charlie Kirk's close social circle that allegedly may not show as much grief as many of Charlie's supporters that came out to his tours, debating tours across university campuses, and followed Charlie's journey, just debating whatever comes to his mind and just talking about whatever the US government is doing and why, or at least trying to open perspectives to other people that have certain opinions and say, well, what if I told you that this happened and they said this? Again, make of that information as you will. You don't have to agree with any of that, but open dialogue is very important. And even if it is with sensitive topics, which we have to be cautious about what we say, it is important that we discuss about these difficult topics and have an understanding for why moments like this happen to begin with. Next, I've sent a YouTube video. Let me turn my brightness up. We are going back! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Artemis, NASA, moon landing, space exploration. So this YouTube video is talking about we are heading back to the moon. But you may not have said but in that video, which I'll actually upload to you right now, let's see how this goes. It's taking a while. Gravity not included. That's funny.
In a few days, we're going back to the moon, and this time around, we are alive to watch it. The first launch window for Artemis II opens on February 6th, and the 4 astronauts are already in pre-flight quarantine. Okay, to be clear, we're going to the moon, not on the moon just yet. Artemis II is a pathfinder mission, meaning that it will not land on the moon. It will fly around it and then come back. But that doesn't make it less important. On the contrary, it's a fundamental step. It's like the Apollo 8. It's we stand on the shoulders of the giant stuff. A few days ago, the crew entered the 14 days of quarantine in Houston to be sure that they don't catch a cold just before launch. If nothing goes wrong, they will fly to NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida about 6 days ahead of launch. Meanwhile, in Florida, the preparations and checks of the SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft are going without any issue. Let's not jinx it. Now the fingers have to stay crossed for the wet dress rehearsal, the testing of fueling and procedures during a simulated countdown that should happen as early as this Saturday, January 31st. These were the updates as of today, but the best has yet to come. I grew up with Apollo as history. Now we are watching the next chapter of space exploration being written live.
So yeah, it's a massive step in the space exploration sector, and of course, it's a pathfinder. They're not going to land on the moon. They're just going to find a path on how we get to the moon to begin with. So, of course, if Eric was on here right now, he'll have something to say. Not sure what, but something along the lines of, I wish we can go to space. We hope we can go to space, but we find it hard to believe that we can. And you know what? I don't blame him on that. I too want to go to space and explore planets, and maybe find new habitable climates for us to inhabit, to expand human civilization. Yet, there's a thing called the firmament, and if we can't break past it, we're only confined to the planet that we're on right now. So, let's just see how this mission goes, if it's a success, and if there's any chances for human exploration beyond planet Earth. That'd be pretty cool. However, for now, it's not looking very convincing right now, and especially since the last time someone landed on the moon, which was like the 1960s. Quite a long time since the last mission to space or a mission to land on a planet. Another YouTube video I've sent onto the Discord group chat is a YouTube video by the Aesthetic City. The video, in brief, was showing different polls and researches about how people across age demographics, ethnic backgrounds, political opinions, or many people group identifications, whatever you identify yourself as, everyone unanimously agrees that they prefer to see or witness the construction and existence of traditional, classical, slash ornate buildings as opposed to modernist buildings. And I agree. I don't particularly hate modernist buildings. Yeah, I don't feel any good vibes coming from modern buildings. And people ask, why do many people go to Europe? Well, have you seen the buildings that European cities have? Most of which were built in like close to before the start of the 20th century. Most of them were built before the start of the 20th. You go to other places, most cases, you can see traditional classic buildings. And then there's a mix of high sky rises, building scrapers, building scratchers, one Italian woman called it. Yeah, if there was an opportunity to vote on which buildings should be constructed, classical, traditional buildings, any day, any time, any day. And anyone saying this is a limitation on economic growth, well, who the heck would say that? Even if there is research about economic growth and classical buildings, well, let me tell you this. Do you think that everything's about money? You believe that having a big economy is life's goal? No, no, it's not. It shouldn't be our life's goal to have a big economy. We should enjoy life to the fullest and pursue our wildest dreams. Yet there are limitations to achieving our dreams, and I'm not just talking about the free will that we possess. It also comes down to our surrounding environments, whether it be the spaces where we contribute to our dreams, the environments of the cities we live in, and the accessibility to get to those spaces that we usually congregate to then push forward with pursuing and achieving our dreams. Many major European cities with traditional classic buildings. It's more than a relic of history. It also serves character to the city it resides in. It sets those cities apart from other cities, not just on the continent, let alone the country, but the rest of the world. And having the character is why many people consider maybe moving there. Because there's so much character that whatever hometowns they have gone to don't have. Other reasons people move to European cities with such traditional classical buildings, it comes down to the structure of them. Mainly in which that when you look at modern buildings, how often do they talk about ventilation or yeah, I don't know what else to say other than ventilation. The flow of air, and also the materials in which modern buildings are constructed with. It doesn't have good effects to the cityscape, not just in aesthetics, but also practical limitations and harms to everyday people. For example, the exterior of modern buildings could either reflect heat in a strong concentrated beam onto the ground to the point that cars melt, vegetation sets on fire. That actually happened somewhere in London. You know, the tall skyscraper that's shaped like a walkie-talkie or brick phone. Yeah, that's the one. That actually happened. But that's not the only reason. Again, I did say about aesthetics. Although people don't care, there may be people in this world that don't care about aesthetics. there are people who have lived most of their lives in cities or towns whose buildings have been constructed before the 20th century, or even buildings that have been built after the 20th century, yet contains characteristics of classical, traditional, or ornate detail that gives these buildings in question character that is at least unique from other buildings around the world, especially those that have been constructed in the 20th. That's just my take on it. If I have to choose between classical buildings or modern buildings, I go classical buildings. There's so much potential and so much character that gives a city its identity. And actually, thinking about it, how many people have said to you, "Oh, I want to go to Brussels"? Imagine the reaction people would get when you say that. Yeah, that's not gonna fly well. For the most part, Brussels is just the headquarters for the European Union, for the most part. Of course, there's Strasbourg, where the Parliament is. However, majority of EU departments are in Brussels. So, other than the EU headquarters, what reason would you have to go to Brussels? I'm just saying. And I'm not, and I didn't even mention, not that it's important, I didn't even mention, and I have seen videos online about the kinds of people that Brussels currently have that have immigrated to settle, try and find a job and such. I didn't mention that. And again, not that it's important. If you were to talk to people about going to Brussels, other than the EU headquarters, they might, not guaranteed, but they might talk about the foreigners that have chose to reside in Brussels. That is all I will say. So that's all the group chat stuff out of the way. It is now time to get into the news. China has lifted sanctions on 6 British MPs and peers, Prime Minister Starmer says. Sir Keir Starmer announced during broadcast interviews in Shanghai that China lifted restrictions on 6 current members of the British Parliament after his meeting with President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Thursday. Beijing responded in 2021 by sanctioning senior British politicians with travel bans and asset freezes after the UK targeted 4 Chinese officials and a state-run organization over Xi Jinping's abuses. The parliamentarian said, "We will not accept any reprieve that applies only to sitting lawmakers, while others, including civil society organizations, remain sanctioned." The 5 MPs are Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, Tom Tugendhat, Nusrat Ghani, Neil O'Brien, and Tim Loughton, along with Piers Baroness Kennedy and Lord Alton. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the two sides agreed in principle to resume normal exchanges between the legislatures in Beijing and Westminster, while it is understood that Britain will not lift its own sanctions in return. Several groups remain sanctioned despite the easing for parliamentarians. China has been accused of crimes against humanity over the Uyghur people, which it denies, while Sir Keir Starmer's 3-day trip to China since 2018 aimed to thaw relations and vindicated his approach. So, classic state visit, talking about issues that you know that people will say, "Oh, that's not happening. Hey, you're just hearing stuff." No, it's happening. You just don't want to admit that it's happening. Again, and whilst I'm not going to give Starmer too much credit, at least he's doing something. It's better to do something than nothing. But even when it's not enough, at least he's doing something. I mean, at least it's the least he could do, given that not a lot of people in the UK are liking what he's doing in the UK at the moment. Whilst there's loads of negatives and downsides to the current UK government, it is important to try and look into the positives, if there are any. And if they're not, could this be the worst that could happen yet, if at all? And besides, maybe this time, who knows, maybe the worst has already happened, and from this point going forward, things may not automatically get better, but it is gradually less worse than what happened previously. Whatever previously happened in question is open to interpretation, as people have definitions or opinions on what they believe is the worst thing that's ever happened in the UK since the last general election. Make of that as you will. So, China have lifted sanctions on 6 British MPs. I don't have much to say, other than what I've already said. It is something. It's progress. It's not fixing the fixed everything. China and the UK aren't buddies just yet, if not at all. If you're going to do state visits, at least it's important to discuss something to closer to tight the ties. That does not make any sense. At least strengthen the ties between the two nations. Luigi Mangione will not face death penalty, judge rules. On Friday, January 30th, 2026, District Judge Margaret Garnett dismissed the death-eligible counts for Luigi Mangione's indictment, ruling he will not face the death penalty if convicted. The judge found that prosecutors relied on stalking charges which do not meet the legal definition of a crime of violence, ruling after oral arguments earlier this month. Court records show that during the arrest, police found a loaded magazine wrapped in underwear inside Mangione's backpack, along with a notebook describing whack of an insurance executive and surveillance footage of a masked shooter. He was arrested 5 days later in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The ruling dealt a setback to federal prosecutors in Manhattan after Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered them last April to seek the death penalty, and Garnett gave prosecutors 30 days to notify any appeal plans. Mangione has pleaded not guilty, and federal jury selection is scheduled to begin September 8th, while the Manhattan District Attorney's Office urged a July 1st start for the state trial. Well, firstly, I'll say that despite what Mangione has done that has led him to this moment in the first place, I'm actually glad that Luigi isn't going to get the death penalty. And whilst there will be people that will argue about him killing the CEO of a health insurance company and his punishment should reflect that, I would argue against that. You don't resolve issues relating to death with more deaths. That's not how things work. And even if he deserved the death penalty, I still argue against it. I think he should pay the price for his crimes whilst he's still alive. Because giving him the death penalty, well, you're just taking him out of existence. And then he goes wherever his soul is taken. I think if Luigi Mangione is to be punished, he should be alive to pay the price for what he's done. And whilst there will be people that argue that the person that Luigi Mangione has killed, being the CEO of a health insurance company in the United States, infamously known for denying legitimate claims for any providence for any medical or health insurance, do not stoop to his level. Do not stoop to the level of your enemies. And if Eric was on here right now, I think he will say the same thing. Like we get that you don't like the US health insurance company's decision with denying claims to give assistance to people that need to pay off the medical bills for whatever reason people are in hospital for. And American healthcare is so dang expensive. Like, what the heck was up with that? That's delusional. Thank goodness for the NHS, in my opinion. So back to Luigi Mangione not facing the death penalty. That Luigi Mangione is not getting the death penalty. He shouldn't get the death penalty. He should pay the prices for what he has done. The death penalty should not be one of them. To pay the price for what he has done, especially if it is against someone who is in a position of power, responsible for many Americans' health insurances. Do not stoop to love your enemies, even if your enemies deserve the worst possible punishment. I'll leave it at that. Don Lemon has been arrested, according to a Justice Department official. Lemon live-streamed a protest that interrupted a church service in St. Paul, Minnesota, against President Donald Trump's immigration policies. Lemon's lawyer, Abby Lowell, described the arrest as an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment. The nature of the charges against Lemon is unclear after a federal magistrate judge rejected a criminal complaint last week. Policy. If, when you're expressing your opinions about Donald Trump's immigration policies, and not just interrupt the church service by expressing your opinions, but you also physically obstruct pathways within the church, whether it be churchgoers, the parents, that is what a lot of people are going to be pointing to, and have opinions about what goes on in Minnesota. You do not obstruct physically people within the church going about whatever they do in church. What's going to be the defense regarding obstructing physically between churchgoers, children at Sunday school, in line with expressing your opinions about immigration policies and the events in Minnesota? It's important to express your opinions. However, but if you're going to somehow obstruct physically within the church to prevent people from doing what they have to do, parents collecting their children, or preventing church services from continuing, then that is viable for arrest and a court trial. No one's going to be talking about the opinions that was expressed. They're going to be talking about the obstructions within the church. And even when these protesters are discussing their opinions whilst the church service was going on, I'd assume the church service would continue while protesters are chanting their opinions and chanting their concerns that they have going on. I think the line has to be drawn about physical obstruction, mainly with the parents being obstructed to collect their children from Sunday school. That will be the likely subject. That'll be the subject that's most likely will be discussed in that trial, if there is one put in place. Don Lemon and other protesters, they're going to have to explain themselves about why they would have to obstruct, in the physical sense, the service. That is not to say they don't. That is not to say they shouldn't express their opinions. Everyone is entitled to their opinions, and the church service does not have to stop when those opinions are being shouted across the hall. It's just the obstructions, mainly on the physical sense, that the court will mainly point out to. So yeah, that's as much I'll say on that. Court of Appeal rules decision underlying Fed's plastic ban reasonable. I don't see why not. On January 30th, 2026, the Federal Court of Appeal overturned a lower court ruling restoring Ottawa's authority to maintain its single-use plastics ban. Government appeals the 2023 ruling after a federal court judge found Ottawa overstepping by designating all plastic manufactured items as toxic. In its legal reasoning, the court found both the listing and procedural choice reasonable, with a unanimous 3-judge panel upholding the government's Board of Review decision and the listing of plastic manufactured items as toxic Friday. The ban covers common single-use items such as grocery bags, straws, stir sticks, and six-pack rings, while the federal government said are common litter with accessible alternatives. The coalition and 3 chemical companies challenged the designation in court, while the Reasonable Plastic Use Coalition and 3 chemical companies bringing the legal challenge as the Federal Court of Appeal prepared to rule. Actually, I don't think there's much for me to complain about the plastic ban. In fact, there should be some alternatives outside of plastics that we can use in our day-to-day lives, and especially when we no longer have to use something once the said item is no longer of its intended use anymore, you recycle it and they're repurposed to be used for something else. One question I have is, if we're going to get rid of any kind of plastic, assuming that all the manufactured plastic items are considered toxic, according to the Federal Court of Appeal in Canada, what alternatives for items like cups, straws, or anything made of plastic, what kind of material will be used as an alternative that is both durable, resistant to scratches and bumps, and viable to be recycled, to be repurposed, to be used for another purpose for something else? Any answer for that, I'm all ears. Until then, I think a lot of people, a lot of companies are still going to continue using plastics, even if Canada deems all kinds of plastic being deemed to be toxic. If there aren't any alternatives to plastics for any item that is made of plastic, then yeah, companies, people, and companies and organizations are going to find ways to still continue using plastics if it means the purpose is a necessity for operating the business in question, or just the continuing functioning of society. So yeah, well, I'm all for the plastic ban. Just have to find alternatives to plastics for every item that uses or have materials made of plastic that is viable and durable to the point that we no longer need plastic materials for such material, or to be used for such items to be made of such plastic, if that makes sense. And that is it for the episode.